This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon.
Waste, fraud, and abuse. Every politician on either side of the aisle claims on the campaign trail every 2 years that they'll tackle these problems. It sounds good. It sounds like change we can believe in. So we elect the politician who says these things. We elect these people in the hope that they'll be stewards of our tax dollars, the money our government is so insistent on collecting from us. Then a funny thing happens once your champion takes office and feels the power in their hand. Rather than smash the cookie jar to 1,000 pieces as they have been given a mandate to do, they decide they like the cookie jar. It's too beautiful to break. And so rather than smash the cookie jar, they hand it to their friends. Rather than be a steward of the public trust, they become a steward of the cookie jar itself. The Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, is the first serious attempt in our lifetimes to smash the frame of politics set by FDR and to smash the cookie jar along with it. Before FDR took office in 1933, the federal government was relatively small. Indian affairs was one of the biggest things in its portfolio. By the time he died in 1945, the U.S. federal government, Uncle Sam, was all things to all people. It was involved in all aspects of American life. At the end of World War II, America was the only Western country left standing. And so at the exact moment our spending had ballooned on the home front, America, the city on the hill, also became Team America, World Police. Now every problem in the world became our problem, and Uncle Sam, on our behalf, pulled out our pocketbook or sent men with guns to make it right. Fast forward 80 years, and Donald Trump takes office for the second time with a mandate to cut spending, a mandate to crush the cookie jar. The scalpel he's using is the Department of Government Efficiency. My guest today is Parker Thayer, an investigative reporter at Capitol Research Center in Washington, but he lives here in Michigan. More than anyone else in Michigan, Parker studies the flow of money in the realm of politics and policy. And so he's here today to shed light on the flow of federal dollars, which, never forget, these are our dollars. And so as Doge gets to work, Capitol Research Center has published the Doge Files so the public can follow along with its research. Parker, welcome to the Enjoyer Podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Absolutely. Parker, let's start you here. Who is Parker Thayer? What would you have people know about yourself, your background, and the work you do?
That's a great question. Well, I grew up here in Michigan, down near Toledo, Ohio, in Monroe County. That's where I live now. I went to Hillsdale College, so I've been in Michigan for a long time.
Okay.
Majored in economics there and started working at the Capitol Research Center, investigating, nonprofit spending, activist groups trying to get control of federal policy and things like that. And kind of that devolved into federal spending when we realized that so many of them are getting tax dollars for seemingly no reason at all. I have a little baby girl on the way, very excited about that. So we're going to be adding to the population of Michigan, unlike, the last several decades of Michigan's population trends. And I really enjoy fishing and hunting.
Parker, how were you able to stay in Michigan after college? Like, did you absolutely have to go out of your way to do it? Was it a big priority to you?
Oh yeah, it was.
How'd that happen?
Yeah, I mean, most of the work I do is on a computer, and so I lived in DC shortly, and the COVID mask mandates and the vaccine requirements to get into restaurants and go to the gym were just driving me nuts. So I just said, I'll work remote. I'll go home. It's a lot cheaper there. So now I have a house in Michigan. Things are going really well. Couldn't be happier with the choice.
Yeah, but I understand a lot of your colleagues, or I guess a lot of your classmates, former classmates, especially from Hillsdale, because a lot of them come from elsewhere too, have that eye on leaving. How prevalent, among your contemporaries, do they stay or do they go?
It's about 50-50, I'd say. They're not quite leaving in droves from Michigan. A lot of people from outside of Michigan end up staying. I have a couple good friends who did that. But, a lot of people do head to DC, which is arguably a pretty good thing for the country, hopefully.
Right.
As long as they can get themselves into positions of power with the common sense education they got. But yeah, it's Michigan is definitely having a hard time getting people to stay, which is no fun. Which is amazing considering how much federal money we get.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. How did the Doge Files project come about?
We were talking about government spending and nonprofits. It started with a project that I did, a research project on the funding for kind of transgender activism, medicine. There's that famous bit going around right now about the Trans Columbian Opera,
Right.
which I think we can claim. I'm not entirely sure, but I think we can claim we discovered that. We're the first ones to find that. And so we added up all of the spending for things on, they were researching all of the horrible ways that people who had the transgender surgeries and hormone therapies were dying because of the side effects of it. Meanwhile, of course, these are all safe and effective. But we researched that, added it up. It was like $100 million. And from there, we got really interested. What else? What other nonprofits? What other insane things are getting these federal money? And from there, I learned to use the USAspending.gov database and a lot of other things to track the flows of federal money. And then that became the Doge Files, and now we have a couple different team members working on the project.
Tell us about some things you've learned so far in your early search. I mean, I see the the Doge Files section on the website is starting to populate with the different departments. Really looking forward to when you guys get into Homeland Security and all that. But what's some early nuggets you guys have unearthed?
We found a lot of stuff. For example, one of the things that's relevant to Michigan is the Department of Agriculture has this thing called the Climate Smart Agriculture Program, which has billions of dollars in funding. Climate smart agriculture sounds very good. When you look into it, what climate smart agriculture actually means is not doing agriculture. It's very climate smart to not farm, apparently. And so they'll pay farmers to grow what they call, in a lot of cases, it's called cover crops, which is basically you just grow grass on your field. In other words, you don't do anything to it aside from maybe drop some seeds on it. And then they pay you $25 an acre or more for a year to just let your field lie there, generate no food, raise food prices, and supposedly help the climate. But there's a wide amount of disagreement. There's great disagreement on whether this actually helps the climate at all. And even if it did, is that really something that farming ought to prioritize? But, for example, in Michigan, the Michigan Association of Conservation Districts got a $4.7 million grant from the Department of Agriculture to do climate smart fruit, vegetable, and livestock production here in Michigan. So they're $4.7 million, and that's just one of them. There's more climate smart agriculture grants in Michigan.
But the fact that it works directly against the purposes you think a farm would serve, so you're paying farmers to not farm. I guess the idea, what are they trying to avoid exactly? What's not green about farming? Is it the cow farts? Like what?
I guess if you till the soil, supposedly carbon comes out of the soil and goes into the air, but it's almost impossible to actually accurately measure it because you'd have to measure the carbon output of acres and acres of land all at once. You'd basically have to put like a dome over it. It's the science. I'm not a scientist by any means, but I've read some scientists who disagree with the idea that it helps the climate a lot. And
and so this isn't like settled science. This isn't give them this money and it'll for sure work.
Yeah. And if
it's a theory and it's progressive politics more than even science. I mean, this is basically this is degrowth. Yeah. This is degrowth. If you can turn a farmland fallow, there'll be less food and eventually less people.
Yeah, it's silly, and no, farmers don't do this. They would never do this because farming is profitable. It makes the money. They would never do this. Even with the subsidy, most of them aren't doing it. These projects are all way over budget and way behind schedule. They wanted to get millions of acres turned into cover crops by a certain time. And the one program I looked at was 8 years behind schedule and like $15 million over budget at very minimum. And that was the best case scenario. They didn't really publish the data accurately in any way that I could find. It's on the...
Is that to say that they're having to overpay for the land that people do sell them?
Yeah.
Probably because there's so few people willing to lease the land like that.
Yeah, so they don't have to sell it necessarily. They just have to prove that they're not farming anything on it.
Which so you get to keep your land and not farm it, and
we'll
get
pay
paid
you to do that. And the best part is that there are so many households in Michigan that technically, there are people who have farmland that don't actually.
Alyssa Slotkin is technically, in the eyes of the law, she's a
Exactly.
farmer. You look at the aerial view, there's not a crop, there's not anything but grass and ass on that farm. And she gets the farming tax credit. So someone like that could seek out
they
this
could qualify
money
for this program
and say that I'm doing a solid for Mother Earth by being a fake
continuing
farmer.
to have grass on my field.
Holy
that was
cow.
grass before. Now you do get slightly less money if it was previously cover crops, and then you can roll in the program post growing your cover crops. The whole thing is crazy. And this was like 1 hour of research on one grantee from this one program, the Department of Ag, and it was it was like, oh, okay, so we just threw away $20 billion. It's basically, it took like 2 hours to figure it out. Insanity. And that's just, so another, if we're doing the Department of Agriculture, I got another one, the Greening of Detroit, which is apparently a nonprofit.
Yes.
$9.6 million grant to increase Detroit's forest canopy through community engagement.
Through community engagement.
So they're not actually planting trees. They're engaging the community. I guess if we all dance around them, they grow faster or something.
Right, a communal rain dance.
Yeah, we'll just do a rain dance, and the trees will grow very big and tall. Because
we have a parks department. We have people who could plant trees.
You would think, but no, it's much more efficient to hand the money over to Greening of Detroit, which who knows who runs that guy. I haven't even looked into it. There are departments that exist specifically. We probably have city employees that specifically take care of trees. But instead, the money goes to a nonprofit that does community engagement to increase the amount of trees in Detroit, which, again, Detroit has much bigger problems than a lack of trees, a lack of Super Bowl wins. Can we solve that?
That's a much bigger problem.
I would
Unfortunately, USAID can't do much about that, but man.
Can we pay Aiden Hutchinson to stay with the money and stuff? I mean, there's so many other problems. Murder, that's another big one.
That is a big one.
I would prefer to fix that first, but Greening of Detroit with trees and community engagement is
what gets me, Parker, is as you talk about these things, normally the framework and why it's so hard to cut spending is because every dollar has a constituency, and whether usually it's the people who are helped by a program, if you say people on food stamps can't buy pop with the food stamp, now you got Al Sharpton on your butt because Coke hired him to do it. But these kind of things, who's even the constituency for it? I mean, I guess
the nonprofits,
right?
Because the employees of the nonprofits, they have lots of time. They can spend all day writing letters and calling offices. They advocate for their communities. They organize. And essentially they organize to just keep getting more money. That their whole job. It's factory fundraising. They raise more money so they can raise more money.
Right.
There's no one who really wanted like Greening of Detroit or climate smart fruit and vegetables and livestock. It's just people in DC and people with way too much time in Michigan getting together and making bad things happen.
And we talk about this being our tax money, and some of it is, but how does the money printer factor into this? Because they could say, hey, we're printing off plenty of money too. It's not necessarily what we're taking from you that we're spending. How much of this do you is us, and how much is the money printer, which is our grandkids?
We've mortgaged our future like 3 times over already. I don't know how much we can even.
What do we even have left to give?
Yeah, every penny of it, it's all debt. With none of the money actually exists. It's coming from the federal coffers, which is it's getting some of it from tax dollars, but we're in deficit spending now. So presumably you could consider it all to be, the money printer. And
why, when you turn on the news, especially, anything like MSNBC, any NBC affiliate, basically at this point, even NBC News, the main one, the spending is not treated as a crisis. The mortgaging your future is not treated as a crisis. The work of Elon Musk to try to get in here and cut contracts $1 million at a time is treated as a crisis. From a psychological standpoint, how did we get to accept that frame? That that we can spend limitlessly, and that the only bad people are the ones you try to cut.
There's a famous little comedy skit animation where a politician comes up and he says, "I want good thing," and everyone claps and say, "Yes, good thing is very good. We love good thing." And then the other politician says, "I want reasonable thing," and then everyone screams at him and says, "No, he wants bad thing. He doesn't want good thing. He wants bad thing." And then the politician freaks out and says, "No, I want good thing too." And then everyone, then the money goes out.
Right.
We're so obsessed with virtue signaling and moral superiority. That's a big part of how the spending got to where it is right now. Is we think the solution to every problem is money because we see there's constant news cycles about how greedy corporations are doing this and that their money is generating solutions. And so people think, oh, of course, the natural way to oppose that is to throw more money in the opposite direction. And then nothing gets done because money is not the solution. It's always been, people, intelligence, proper incentives to get people to do things on their own. That's how we solve problems. The free market, that's how things get done. But that doesn't really factor in, and then bureaucrats get thrown into the whole thing, and they're spending money that's not theirs. They have really no reason to care about it. There's no incentives to save money. There's lots of incentives. You can get promoted if you spend money, so they spend money.
And one thing that concerns me when I saw all that USAID money and $20 million for Sesame Street in Baghdad and that kind of thing.
Oh, there's 3 different Sesame Streets actually. There's one. There's one in translated into Arabic. There's one for Lebanon, and I think there's also another one there's another one for Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I think so. It's either Sri Lanka or it's Pakistan. I can't remember.
S is for Sri. That's good enough for me. And that's so. If I'm the person who has that ability to hand that grant out, right at the Ford Foundation, it might take me decades to rise to that stature, where I'm whoever the CEO, Darren something, and I'm that guy, and I can cut that check. But now we're letting any old government bureaucrat have that same power. Jeff Bezos wants to cut $1 billion. It's a big deal. One of these bureaucrats wants to hand out 20, 30, 50, 100 million. You don't even know their name, but behind the scenes, anyone who knows that bureaucrat and their connection to the spigot of money would have to treat this person very powerfully. Can you talk about the corrupting influence of letting bureaucrats have that much say over where the money goes?
Yeah, I mean, that's why the wealthiest counties in all of America, they call them super zip codes. Every single, all of the top 10 of them, I think, every single one of them is in a big circle around Washington, D.C.
Jeez.
I mean, these things, that doesn't just happen. That doesn't just occur because, lawyers move there. No, lawyers would go to New York or L.A. if that's where the money was too. But the reason they're going there is because the money is easiest to get there. And that's why all the super wealthy zip codes are around D.C. The bureaucrat salaries don't pay that well. And supposedly that D.C. is where all the bureaucrats live.
Right.
Why on earth are all of the super zip codes around D.C.? It doesn't add up, And
that's even with these 6-figure salaries that we see. It's clear from how much money that's flowing around here that the real dollar amounts are much bigger. So, for instance, I'm going to give, person A a grant for $20 million for Sesame Street in Sri Lanka. Why wouldn't I have them hire my cousin's production company? Or a company just created that day even to produce the show? I mean, that you'd almost be a fool to not get your hand back in the cookie jar at that point. Why wouldn't
and
you?
There's so many. Once you get into the government will give a grant to one organization, and then that organization will sub-grant to 10 different organizations. And then those organizations all have contractors that they're hiring to do the work, because it's really hard to get nonprofit employees to stay in the nonprofit sector full time. So you go to a for-profit consulting firm owned by who knows, because it's incorporated in Delaware, where you don't have to give a name for your incorporation. It can just be a P.O. box. and then that corporation supposedly performs, some charitable service for them. After, two degrees of separation, you're basically, the money goes into a black hole, and anyone could be, pocketing it somewhere. And there's so much money going out, it's almost impossible to tell if that is or isn't happening. I haven't found any direct proof yet of, clear fraud, but it seems almost impossible that there's not a large amount of it happening, because there's so much money and seemingly no oversight on it.
Yeah. Our friend Ken Braun, your boss at Capital Research, he found a great quote that I think really encapsulates our entire problem here. It's a mental problem. We have the wrong mindset toward this money. And so Coolidge said, nothing is easier than spending the public money. It does not appear to belong to anybody. The temptation is overwhelming to bestow it on somebody. So this is a man who was president a century ago, said this in 1960. How did the world of politics, maybe it's always been this way, maybe it was the Federal Reserve, how did politicians arrive at this mentality that this money belongs to nobody and is not, in fact, our money as taxpayers?
Well, I can tell Coolidge was a well-educated man, because I can hear in that quote that he read Machiavelli. Machiavelli, way back in the pre-Renaissance Italy, wrote his book called The Prince. And in the book, he says one of his most important pieces of advice is to be generous with other people's money and frugal with your own. That's
Holy
paraphrasing,
cow.
Of course. But,
Right.
That's what's been going on for a really long time. That's how you get, nearly $10 million for community engagement for trees in Detroit. It's all about incentive structures, and there's no incentive to be frugal with taxpayer money. Nobody gets a raise for doing that in the federal departments. And that's where it's going to have to start. You're going to have either members of Congress or bureaucrats have some sort of career penalty for spending absurd amounts of money on things that are wasteful and that don't end up working. That's the only way this is going to get fixed.
It's funny you say that, because the incentive structure, my understanding, the way budgets work either in Lansing or in Washington, if you have $10 million and you spend $9 million, that'll be taken by the budget makers as you don't need all 10. So the goal is to spend all 10 every year and ask for 11. This mentality is so directly opposed to the well-being of the American people. Parker, one group that I think about constantly, Samaritas. Data Republican looks at them. They say, in 2023, something like 25 million out of 36 comes from government funds, direct or indirect, 70% of its money. And so these are the people who relocate immigrants into Michigan, people who would not have a pot to piss in, but for Samaritas, and Samaritas brings them to our doorstep. Samaritas could not exist without our money. Is that kind of arrangement, this seemingly purpose-built group that it's almost acting like a quasi-government body. I don't see a non-government organization. I see the government paying them to do things that the government can't do. Is this kind of thing typical or atypical?
No, that's very typical. I'm working on Department of State research right now, and they give out enormous grants to the state. We have Health and Human Services, USAID, and the Department of State are all spending billions of dollars on refugee resettlement. And it's all it's the same handful of 10 groups doing all of it throughout the entire country and internationally. And these groups, I think the highest number I saw was 95% of their funding in the last fiscal year came from, they have a little column on their 990 where they can report government grants, or they're supposed to report government grants, and they seemingly do. Because I don't think the numbers could really get any higher. There's no way they're hiding government grants. There was 70%, 80%, 95%, 60%. All of them, the majority of their funding comes from the taxpayer. And we have essentially, beyond the very limited strings we can attach to grant funds and to contracts, we don't have any control really over these groups. And these are all functions that could be performed by, the Department of State or Department of Homeland Security or something. But we're outsourcing these jobs mostly because, federal salaries have these draconian salary caps, but nonprofits don't. So you can get paid $400,000 a year to run a nonprofit that resettles refugees, when maybe you worked at the State Department the last 5 years and your salary was capped at $80,000.
Right. So you talk about a revolving door. So today's grantee is tomorrow's CEO, is another grantee, 5 years from now when they need to get back into government and get that credibility back up. And what I find so interesting about this, it seems like this is done specifically to avoid transparency or the public reach. So if I give the money to Samaritas, you can't FOIA Samaritas for how they spent it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's going on with the EPA right now. Lee Zeldin had a great announcement yesterday. There's this
$20 billion?
$20 billion.
Please
That's a real number.
Understand in plain language what Zeldin said yesterday, because it blew my mind.
Yeah. So what they did is there was this great video where Project Veritas caught an EPA staffer on camera saying that we're throwing gold bars off the Titanic as Trump comes into office. What they were doing is part of the Inflation Reduction Act that got snuck in there was that they were going to allocate $20 billion to create essentially green banks, is what I like to call them, that are going to invest in solar energy, electric vehicles. They're going to give really low interest loans to startup companies doing, like composting or something. Basically, all of this money is going to get laundered back to the same people who end up funding the Democratic Party, because all of the investors in solar energy company, I think you can guess which party they support.
Right.
And so they, instead of running a green bank themselves, using the Department of Treasury, using the EPA itself to create some sort of financial institution, they said, it's easiest. We're just going to give the money away to nonprofits, and then those nonprofits will create a bank. And there's already there has been massive problems with fraud found. They like things were getting shut down even before Lee Zeldin stepped in and said, look, we're freezing all of the funds that have not been sent out yet, even though billions had already been shoveled out the door. That's exactly what they're doing. They don't want the reason the NGOs and the donor advised funds and the green banks and all of these things are getting the money is because there's no oversight there, and the people giving out the money want the money to get to a certain destination, but they can't get it there unless they give it to somebody else first.
Is that money laundering?
One might call it that.
It sounds a lot like
man.
I heard the explanation on Office Space, and that sounds a lot like what I heard. Now, the guy was on crack, admittedly, so I don't know how what the provenance was there. Parker, how different was the last 4 years in the way the government operates? Like, was it really that much of a break from the Trump years, or are we talking about 1789 to now? Our government's operated this one way, and now we have a chance to change.
It's the Biden administration. So the spending has been out of control for a very long time. The Biden administration was just way more out of control than anyone has ever been. If you look at, for example, if you go to USAID spending, they'll give you nice little year-over-year bar graphs of, you can search a keyword for a grant. So one of my favorite exercises, I go and I type the word refugee into the keyword search, and I look at the bar graph over the years, and the amount of federal spending that uses the keyword refugee in the description of what the spending is for. The graph is kind of horizontal, and then it goes up kind of steeply, and then it's a vertical line in 2021, and then it stays up there, and then it goes down, it's hopefully going to go down starting in 2025. Same thing happens with if you search transgender as a keyword. Flatline, vertical spike, stays up, and hopefully will go down. We had unprecedented amounts of money being shoveled out the door to the most crazy left-wing things. This administration, I call it the big philanthropy administration. The Ford Foundations of the world just got control of the U.S. government. That's basically what happened.
Right.
So all of the things they funded for a really long time got funded by the federal government too.
Oh my God. And when you read between the lines of it, it's almost like they were governing like they weren't going to get power again. Like this is it. Like this is the last hurrah.
It seemed like they were trying to make sure that they didn't lose ever again. They were putting so much money towards left-wing activism that I think they thought they were invincible. I really do.
How did they lose?
Never lose again.
How could they ever lose with this kind of advantage? I mean, you look at a think tank like the Mackinac Center, very good organization, but they're trying to approximate what exists on every single university in America.
Yeah.
And it's one institution in Michigan. And so you're massively outweighed. Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Heritage
Every
Foundation,
college campus has more resources than Heritage, and they're rich.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even just the college campus. There are think tanks specifically dedicated to just soft on crime policy that raise 4 times per year what the Heritage Foundation raises, which the Heritage Foundation covers every conservative issue.
Right.
And they're the leading conservative think tank on basically every conservative issue. The left has think tanks for just one issue that are 4 times the size of Heritage. It's insane. We are outgunned. But luckily, the ideas of the people we are outgunned by are horrible. Left-wing ideas are bad. They have to spend 5 times what we spend just to achieve, some amount of parity in policy outcomes and general winning.
Well, some of you guys, some of your most powerful stuff so far is on these Green New Deal grants. Ken did some great stuff. So we're talking about $22 billion in grants with 2024 start dates. $22 billion that started to go out the door last year. What is this stuff? And do we have any reason to believe? Like, let's steel man it. Let's look at it from their perspective. How's our life going to change as a result of all this money being spent? How is our environment going to be improved?
There's a great I think it's a grant. It might be a contract, but it's one of the two. That is a great example of this. There's a community center in Bay City, Michigan, that is named after a professional wrestler who wrestled with Andre the Giant.
Which
back
one?
In the day. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. He later ended up trained. Funnily enough, his protege was a wrestler named Kamala Harris that succeeded him. Kind of funny.
Kamala, the Ugandan warrior.
Yeah. I'm not a huge
I think his name was James Harris. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So whoever trained him, the guy before him, this community center is named after. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I do remember that they're getting millions of dollars. I think it was over 10 million. It was definitely in the millions. Might be over 10 million to restore this community center. Supposedly to do repairs on it. Now the repairs, this building has been burned twice by arsonists. It's been shut down since the early 2000s because it's uninhabitable, unsafe to occupy. It supposedly has basketball courts in it, but I can't imagine they're in that good of a state after 2 arson attacks. And they're going to repair this community center. How are they going to repair it? They're going to put solar panels on the roof. That's what they're doing. They're putting solar panels on the roof. You can't occupy the building, but it will be powered by solar.
No. On a building that's not even operational?
Well, the building and all of the surrounding, they're putting solar panels on the roofs of surrounding houses as well. That's what the grant is. The city seems to think that this money will be used for repairs, and I hope it is. I don't think it'll be enough money for the repairs because the building it was originally an armory, I think, and then has been abandoned for decades now. But yeah, solar panels on the roof. That's how this money will affect people's lives. It won't. It'll do useless things that put solar panels on the roofs of buildings that are functionally destroyed.
And think about what this says about the left. They'll pay a farmer to not actually farm. We don't want the growth. We don't want, people to be fed. We don't want the food market to grow. They'll put solar panels on a building that's barely standing. We don't want activity and livelihood and this to be a source of the community. It serves the needs of Mother Earth, and so that's fine. These are anti-human goals. What they want, if you look at it from what the action they're pursuing tells you about their agenda, they want less human activity. They want less human flourishing. They want fewer crops coming out of the ground, and they to put solar panels on a building that doesn't work. Who would think of such a thing?
I can't
if
even.
If the building was open, they would say, "Give us the money so we can buy wrestling mats and basketball courts," and they would never say, "Put solar panels on this thing." But if the government's giving you free money, why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah. And, I sincerely hope, as with most of my grants, honestly, I sincerely hope there's fraud. I hope somebody is taking this money and decocting it, because otherwise they're just dumb. I mean, otherwise we're just funding stupid things. I'd rather it be fraud at this point.
If some guy has a house on the Black Sea and 2 little solar panels go up, I'll say, hey, man, you got us. I'll tip my hat to that guy. But if you actually are going to outfit this thing with solar panels, now I'm thinking you're just insulting me.
In Bay City, Michigan, mind you, which is got to be one of the cloudiest places in all of Michigan. I mean, they're not known for their great weather.
2 miles or 2 hours north of Detroit. It's cold here. It's colder there. Solar panels.
Yeah.
Parker, help people understand. You yourself are still a young man, and so when I have a young guest on, I want people to understand that the reason you got to your stature as a young man is because of the time you've put into your life. Tell people how you got your start. How does one get going as an investigative reporter?
I started with an internship. Capital Research Center has a great internship program. And I basically, when I was an intern, I would go home from work and go to this random student housing apartment that I was living in George Washington University, because they open up their dorms for rentals during the summer. And I would sit on my computer and just keep doing the stuff I was doing at work. I'd just do it after hours. And so I ended up being the first intern in CRC history to get the cover of the CRC magazine. Awesome magazine, by the way.
You guys should all do it. You got the cover as an intern?
Yeah, it was great.
That's
and
huge.
We found a big story that the story ended up taking 3 years of research pretty much to get the whole thing discovered. But I got really good at finding things, and I just kept finding them. That's the great thing about researching government spending or left-wing activism groups and what the various shady things they're up to. They don't think anyone's looking, because no one really is looking. There's lots of stories to be found there.
Hidden in plain sight.
The media hasn't been checking for 20 years.
Right, because they don't think they need to hide, because the media that they're all interacting with agree with them. They're not expecting a Parker Thayer, and then they're saying, one, how many Parker Thayers are there? And two, how much reach will they get talking about numbers and hard policy? But you are making it work.
Yeah, I'd like to think so.
The Elon Musk loves to talk about how we are the media, and I agree. I think one of the best things that ever happened to citizen journalism, and it's been bad for journalism, is that on Twitter right now, we all have the same exact search bar. So the media used to have an information edge over the average person. They no longer have that now, which puts more of an emphasis on, okay, we all know what Governor Whitmer's next budget number is going to be. Who can tell us what it means? Who can tell us what's in there? And so since basic information is so widely available, it puts an emphasis on good information.
Yeah. Media's value is now in nuance, not in data aggregation.
Yeah. Analysis. Tell us what it means. Tell us what's being hidden from us. Tell us what they're not telling us. And that is so valuable.
And it's interesting right now on Twitter. You've got accounts like Data Republican that are kind of, they're just starting on exploring like the world of nonprofits and government spending. And you're seeing them, it's really interesting, because I've watched all of these new and upcoming accounts make the same mistakes that I made when I was just starting out, and you try and reach out and correct them, but they've just got to learn, and they are learning, and all of these accounts are learning the nuances of nonprofits and donor advised funds and all the various weird legal loopholes there are, and all of the things the government's spending money on. It's really awesome to see it, like there is a new media being created right now, and you can watch it happen live in person. It's not happening in some boardroom.
No.
At the New York Times, you don't get to see, the New York Times daily, where all the reporters gather and they talk about what stories they're working on to their bosses. You don't get to see that on Twitter. You do. You can follow 50 different reporters and see live in real time what their editorial board meetings. It's very interesting.
As we are the media, and as people do make use of that search bar and see what they can find themselves. What I think is the biggest unfair advantage to a journalist is a curious heart. But you also have to do what you said, and one of the tougher things in journalism is confirming that what you think you saw and what you think you heard is what you saw and is what you heard. What are some mistakes that someone's going to probably make as they start this, and how can they avoid those?
So one of the big ones, as you start looking into government funding, there's these things called donor-advised funds. One of the big ones is Tides Foundation that people have probably heard of. My colleague Mike Watson has a great blog post up on our Doge files about specifically explaining how to avoid this error and all of the definitions related to it. A donor-advised fund is basically a bank. And so what people started seeing is that there is $27 million, I think it was, that has gone to the Tides Foundation. And the Tides Foundation funds all kinds of things. They fund the Soros DAs, they fund the think tanks that back them, they fund left-wing activism groups, they fund get out the vote activities, they fund random neocon think tanks. And so people were like, they looked at that and they drew the connection. Tides funds these things and USAID funds Tides. So USAID must be funding those things. But Tides is a donor advised fund. So you can think of it, my analogy for it has been, imagine there's a bank and Mark Cuban and Trump both use the bank, and Mark Cuban deposits in his account and Trump withdraws from his account. Did Mark Cuban fund Trump? No.
Right.
But it's kind of it's a pitfall where people will say, well, USAID is funding everything because the donor advised funds fund everything. But and they say money is fungible, but the business model of a donor advised fund is to be non-fungible. Everyone has their own separate account and they can put money in and send it where they want specifically. Otherwise, the donor advised fund, the billionaires want to be able to send the money where they want. So
it's not necessarily, it is wrong, but you'd have to make more of a leap than knowing that it also received USAID funds to be able to say that USAID funds wound up.
You'd have to be able to show USAID gave the money specifically for this project of Tides, as opposed to fund. They're not funding Tides generically. Tides isn't a slush fund. It's just their accounts are very separate. So that's one of the big errors I've seen so far as people learn to explore government funding and nonprofit data. It's very complicated and it's an understandable error. But being accurate is very important. And we'll lose, the movement will lose momentum if people are consistently inaccurate about what the government is funding. So hopefully people pick up on that. And I know some of the big accounts already are and have tried to explain to, the people who follow them as good journalists should, the nuances of all of this. Like I said, nuance is now the new currency in media, and they're starting to obtain that currency. And it's really good to see.
What advice would you give just, to a would-be journalist, whether they're, 45 or 25 or 15? Some, they have a curious heart and they have the search bar. What should they do now?
Learn to use ProPublica. I don't like ProPublica. It's a left-wing outlet that did its best to smear conservative justices, but they do run one good thing. It's you can Google it. It's the ProPublica Nonprofit Explorer.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
The 990s?
Learn to read 990s with it. You can follow the money anywhere in the world. There's all sorts of other data tools that you can learn to use after that, but learn to use ProPublica first. If you're wanting, there's so many stories hidden there, and you can break into journalism just by being knowledgeable about nonprofits. There's so much money there. There's so much intrigue. There's so much politics. There's nonprofits do everything. They do food banks. They do dark money activism. Every possible field of journalism, every beat is contained within ProPublica. If you learn to use it, you'll be better for it, and it'll really help out your career.
Absolutely. Parker, we'll get you out of here on this one. You mentioned a little bit of it at the beginning, and you've written some stuff. What do you enjoy about Michigan?
Oh, I enjoy shoveling snow and saying hi to your neighbor. I enjoy Michigan football games. I enjoy being able to see animals, and hunt them, of course, and fish for them. But be able to see them in relatively close proximity to major urban centers where you can go and get a 5-star dinner and an amazing steak. Right. There's not too many states that you can actually do. I've been on the East Coast. I've lived there. You can't do that there. You can't go from a steakhouse to go shoot a deer or go fish. It doesn't happen. It would take 5 hours, and you'd have to get a pickup truck and probably rent one because it's insane and really expensive to own trucks there. Michigan, we have freedom to go wherever we want, and we can experience whatever life we want here, and all within nothing Nothing is outside of 2 hours for you here.
Parker, I have to ask one more. You love Michigan football. You went to Hillsdale. Help me understand why Hillsdale rather than Michigan.
Because Hillsdale is actually good at school. Michigan is very good at football. Hillsdale is very good at school. It's very good at creating people who are functional. That's supposed to be the point of education. Michigan is much less good at producing people who are functional, which you can see just by walking through the halls of buildings there. The people there are not, their souls aren't being fed by their education. Their future careers might be, maybe, in a lot of cases, not so much.
In a lot of cases, not so much. I mean, I honest to God, I know more journalists who went to Hillsdale, even if they didn't study journalism there, than at Michigan, which, I mean, you can't study journalism at Michigan either, but, you know, it just...
Hillsdale will only let you minor in journalism.
It is not as reliable a path. You know what I mean?
You have to major in something that's much more important.
Really? You can't even major in journalism at Hillsdale?
It's only a minors program. And I think it'll stay that way. The college knows
love that.
Journalism is a career tool more than it is something for forming a good person.
That's exactly it. I would tell any young journalist, do not go to journalism school. Take a class or two, sure, but go to JD school, which is be curious, spell people's names right, and talk to a lot of people who might be familiar with what you're writing about. Do that and you're good. I would tell any young reporter, study the humanities. Psychology or history will go a lot further. Economics, it'll go a lot further in your education as a person and your ability to read situations. Yeah, I mean, imagine if you'd spent 4 years learning how to spell people's names right. It's just not a thing. Yeah. Parker, where can people find yourself online and Capital Research Center?
I'm on Twitter or X as at Parker Thayer, and you can go to capitalresearch.org. And we have right on the top of the page, there'll be a link to what we've got so far in the Doge files. We've got a lot more in the pipeline, but we have a lot published already. A lot of great little, very easy to read. It'll take you 10, 20 minutes, 1,000-word blog posts that list out a lot of the insane things that government money goes to, and we've got a lot more coming.
Absolutely. Parker, thank you so much for taking the time.